Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki, Sharma, Upadhyay. Let's get started. A double mutant was bad enough. Now India is fighting a triple mutant. The health infrastructure is gasping for breath. What's the way out? An Indian-made vaccine. The latest trial data of COVAXIN has been released. Efficacy 78%, 100% effective against serious infections, and apparently good enough to neutralize all variants. This is very good news, and India needs good news because the numbers are devastating. Almost 3 lakh new cases in a day, more than 2,000 deaths. The government is pumping money to expand vaccine capacity, but shortages are hurting India's response. Hospitals are running out of beds, ICU units and oxygen. It's the biggest health crisis of independent India. On Gravitas tonight, we'll bring you key updates on the second wave. Also a special report on how the pandemic impacts children. Do they need a vaccine too? One country is ready to roll out vaccines for teenagers. We'll discuss that. Also on the show, we called it the Wuhan Virus, and many said that's racist. Now the whole world is talking about the UK variant, the Brazil variant, the Indian double mutant, and the WHO is silent. No complaints of racism. What gives, we ask. Russia continues to build up its forces on the border with Ukraine as Europe and America wait and watch. Kiev proposes talks with Moscow. In Sri Lanka, opposition to the Chinese port city has reached the courts. The complaint says Beijing is turning Colombo into its colony. And here's a curve that's flattened and declining. The stock value and subscription of Netflix. We'll tell you why. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Former Minneapolis policeman Derek Chauvin gets convicted on all counts in the killing of George Floyd. Floyd's family says that this is the beginning, and they plan to continue to stand up for other people killed by police officers. Japanese media reports that Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga has called off a visit to India and the Philippines due to a resurgence of coronavirus infections in Japan. Amid rising cases, Japan is mulling imposing state of emergency in Tokyo and Osaka prefectures. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky invites Russian President Vladimir Putin to meet for talks in the war-torn east of the country as tensions between Kyiv and Moscow soar. Zelensky says Ukraine wants to end the conflict through diplomacy, but is ready to defend itself if attacked. Suicide bomber targets Afghan security forces convoy in Kabul, leaving at least 5 people wounded. The European Union clinches a deal on a climate change law that commits the bloc to more than halving its net greenhouse gas emissions by the end of the decade. The deal arrives just in time for a summit of world leaders hosted by the US government on Thursday and Friday, where the EU and other global powers will promote their pledges to protect the planet. An Indonesian Navy submarine has gone missing with 53 people on board. The submarine was conducting a drill north of the island of Bali on Wednesday, but it failed to report back and contact was lost. Officials have called on Australia and Singapore to help in the search. The vessel is one of 5 submarines operated by Indonesia. France has launched a COVID health pass to allow travel to and from its overseas territories and eventually to other EU countries. In Denmark too, fans will be allowed into stadiums from Wednesday and bars, restaurants and museums by showing a corona pass. Meanwhile, the UAE has warned it could impose restrictions on people who have not been vaccinated against COVID-19. France has launched a COVID health pass to allow travel to and from its overseas territories and eventually to other EU countries. In Denmark too, fans will be allowed into stadiums from Wednesday and bars, restaurants and museums by showing a corona pass. Meanwhile, the UAE has warned it could impose restrictions on people who have not been vaccinated against COVID-19. In a little over 2 days, plans for the breakaway European Super League have been shelved in the face of a fierce backlash from fans and governing bodies. The Premier League's Big Six clubs set the ball rolling by withdrawing from the proposed tournament on Tuesday evening when threatened with a ban from domestic competitions. Italians Inter and AC Milan as well as Atletico Madrid from Spain have also pulled out today. Second seed Stefanos Tsitsipas and third seed Andrei Rublev have made winning starts at the Barcelona Open. Tsitsipas, who won the Monte Carlo Masters crown on Sunday, dropped only 2 games against Spaniard Jaume Munar to win 6-love, 6-2 in 78 minutes. Monte Carlo runner-up Rublev was made to work harder, but overcame Italian Federico Gaio 6-4, 6-3.
Nearly 300,000 cases in a day. This should sum up India's pandemic crisis. It's going to take a lot to crush this surge and to tame these deadly mutants. Tonight, I want to begin with some good news. India has found an effective weapon against the mutations. It's called COVAXIN, the Made in India shot. The latest tests show that COVAXIN is effective against all mutations. It's the jab being produced by Bharat Biotech, one of the 2 vaccines being administered in India. The other, as you know, is Covishield. So here's what we know about COVAXIN now. It has an efficacy of 78% in general and an efficacy of 100% against severe infections. So if you get this shot, COVAXIN, you'll most likely not end up in hospital. That is, if you contract the virus. And here's the biggest takeaway from the COVAXIN trial. The vaccine works against mutations too. All the variants you've been hearing about, the UK variant, the Brazil variant, the South African variant, even the double mutant, the one that's said to be driving India's second wave, COVAXIN should work against all of these. This is according to an interim analysis of the final phase of trials, that is phase 3 trials. The final report on this is expected in June. And that's when the findings will be submitted to a peer-reviewed journal for publication. Nonetheless, these results are very promising. How does this compare to other shots? Take the case of Pfizer. It has an effectiveness of 95%. It works well against the Brazil and UK variant, but according to an Israeli study, the Brazil variant could break through the protection of the Pfizer shot. Again, this does not mean that the vaccine is not going to help you, but it may be less effective. Either way, Pfizer does not want to take any chances. It is now looking into what a third dose might do, a booster shot as they call it. That could be given 6 to 12 months after the first 2 doses. Pfizer is conducting a study into the need of the third dose. Then we have Moderna. It is also considering similar possibilities. It reported a more than 90% efficacy for its shot, but it is testing the use of a third dose. Also a booster shot that targets the South African variant. How do the other vaccines fare? Sputnik V, for instance. The makers of this shot say their vaccine is more effective against mutations. That's because it's the only vaccine in the world that uses 2 different kinds of shots. Here's what happens in other vaccines. You get 2 doses of the same vaccine. But in the case of Sputnik V, the second dose is slightly different from the first. And this combination is supposed to prevent the second shot from neutralizing the immunization effects of the first one. Essentially, the purpose remains the same. It's the approach that is different. A study found that Sputnik V has a 92% efficacy rate. What about AstraZeneca, the one that we call Covishield in India? This shot has an overall efficacy of 76%. But it was returned by South Africa. That's because the vaccine was not very effective against the South African variant. Reports say the company is now making a modified version of this vaccine. It should be ready by the end of 2021. And finally, we have Johnson & Johnson, the only single-shot vaccine in the world so far. An overall efficacy rate of 72%. Its trials happened when the South African and Brazilian variants had already spread. So we have some specifics here. This shot, Johnson & Johnson, was 64% effective in South Africa and 66% effective in Brazil. All these vaccines still have to be tested against the double mutant and now the triple mutant, which has been found in India. But here's what we can say for sure. Any vaccine is better than none. Go and get what you're getting. And I know what some of you may be thinking. People are testing positive even after vaccination. So how does it help? Let me show you some data. As we told you before, India is using 2 vaccines, Covishield and COVAXIN. Close to 12 crore people have got Covishield and 1.1 crore have got COVAXIN. So we have data for more than 13 crore people. Do you know how many vaccinated citizens have been infected by the Wuhan virus? In the case of Covishield, a little more than 5,000. That's 0.03% of the total. In the case of COVAXIN, 695 people have tested positive after getting the shot. That is 0.04%. Not even 0.1% people have been infected after being vaccinated. This should tell you how vaccines help. The question now is, will there be enough doses for everyone? Countries like Israel have shown the world that what the future could look like with mass vaccination. Life went back to normal after more than 55% of adults got both the shots there. Now Israel could inoculate kids. The second round of vaccination in Israel could focus on 12 to 15-year-olds. Which brings us to the question, do children need vaccines? Are these vaccines safe for children? Our next report has some answers.
Masks have come off in Israel. People are back on the streets. The beaches are packed. And friends can embrace without fear. Most adults in Israel have got at least 1 shot. Next in line are children. Israel is gearing up for the second round of vaccinations. This time, the jabs will go to 12 to 15-year-olds.
Good evening to you. I'm here today after a meeting with the Minister of Health and the health system officials after I reached an agreement with the heads of Pfizer and Moderna for additional supply of 16 million doses of vaccine for Israeli citizens. We are preparing for another vaccination campaign in 6 months' time. Get your shoulders ready and your muscles if you want, and also the kids, because we estimate there will be approved vaccines by then for children.
In other words, Israel is rolling out Wuhan virus vaccines for adolescents. Do they even need them? Are children at risk without vaccines? Here's what we know. Children do not face high risk from the Wuhan virus. This data is from the World Health Organization. Children make up 29% of the global population. They accounted for 8% of all Wuhan virus cases in 2020. Even fewer ended up in intensive care. Most managed to beat fever, cough, and fatigue. Those below 20 years of age accounted for less than 0.2% of the fatalities. In other words, of all the pandemic deaths in 2020, less than 0.2% were children and teenagers. Long story short, they aren't a high-risk group. But do they need vaccines? Yes, they do. Especially children with serious illnesses. Also, children are potential carriers. They can still pass on the virus to adults. So, vaccines for kids makes sense. Do we have vaccines tailor-made for kids? Not yet. Trials are underway to determine how safe the jabs are for children. Israel is waiting from the American health regulator, Food and Drug Administration, to give the nod. Once it's done, Israel will start inoculating minors. They are betting on two vaccine makers, Pfizer and Moderna. Pfizer could be the first vaccine to be rolled out for children. A study has found that the jab is 100% effective in preventing illness among 12 to 15-year-olds. Reports say Israel has given shots to around 600 adolescents in high-risk categories. They saw no significant side effects. The other player, Moderna, began clinical trials on children above 12 years in December 2020. In March 2021, the first group of children was given the first dose. In February this year, AstraZeneca began testing its jab on 6 to 17-year-olds in Britain. And in China, Sinovac claimed that its vaccine is safe on children as young as 3. The company says it has submitted preliminary data to Chinese regulators. Anthony Fauci, America's top infectious disease expert, is optimistic. He believes kids of any age will be able to get a shot by 2022. And it won't happen too soon. For more than a year now, children across the world have stayed away from school. With the virus still in the air, a full return to in-person learning is impossible. Vaccines may be able to give children the protective shield they need to go back to school. But before they get their jabs, the shots must pass the regulator's test. Bureau Report, World is One.
Now for updates from India. There's good news and bad news. The good news is our vaccines can fight off the double mutation. The bad news is the numbers are still rising. India set a double record on Tuesday, almost 300,000 new cases and more than 2,000 deaths in 24 hours. Let me put these numbers in context. There were 825,000 cases reported globally. 300,000 of them came from India. That's almost 36% of the global caseload. So what's India's exit route from here? Simple, vaccines. On the 1st of May, as you know, India will begin vaccinating all adults, everyone above the age of 18. But are we ready for this phase? Tonight we'll try to answer some questions and give you 5 key updates about the second wave. First of all, how much will vaccines cost and where can you get them? We have figures for Covishield. State governments can buy Covishield at 400 rupees per dose. That's around $5. Private hospitals will have to pay 600 rupees per dose. That's around $8. Where can you get them? Vaccine makers will divide their output into 2 parts. One half goes to the central government. The second half will be sold to states and in the open market. So hospitals and state governments can buy directly from manufacturers and distribute any way they like. Either sell or give the shots for free. Where does that leave you? If you're 45 plus, you can still get vaccinated free of cost, but only at government facilities in India. If you are in the 18 to 45 category, you will have to visit a private hospital. And here, they could probably charge you more than 600 rupees. It depends on where the government caps the price. And these are prices only for Covishield. Bharat Biotech and Sputnik V are yet to announce their rates. Chances are they'll be somewhere between 700 to 1,000 rupees per dose. That's somewhere in the $10 range. So we have a price tag now. But do we have the vaccines? That's update number 2. What is India doing to ensure there is enough for everyone, enough doses on the shelf? India is expanding capacity. The government has granted $610 million to the two vaccine makers, the Serum Institute and Bharat Biotech. Bharat Biotech is expanding output to 700 million doses per year, which basically means around 60 million shots of COVAXIN every month. 60 million. COVAXIN's biggest market is still India. But this vaccine is being studied around the world, including in the US and Europe. What about the Serum Institute? Right now, they're producing 70 million doses of Covishield every week. With the additional funds, they're hoping to produce 100 million doses by the end of May. And if everything goes to plan, Sputnik shipments should also start arriving by then. Update/question number 3. How many doses do you need? 2 doses of a vaccine, unless it's Johnson & Johnson, which is a single-dose vaccine. That is the accepted norm. 2 doses of each vaccine. There's also talk about booster shots. But if you've recovered from the Wuhan virus, you may need only 1 shot. That's according to a new study. Recovered patients could do with a single shot to build immunity. That's because your body already remembers the virus, and 1 shot may be enough to jolt that memory. Does this mean it is time for a policy reversal? Well, we have the example of Israel. They've already tried it. In the month of February, they recommended a single shot for recovered patients. And so far, their rollout has been flawless. No complaints about the single shot, but we need more data normalizing this trend. 1 shot for those who've recovered. Update number 4. Vaccine side effects. The hysteria certainly is cooling down. People have started realizing that side effects are rare, but they're natural. Johnson & Johnson has got a clean chit from the European Union. They have listed blood clots as a rare side effect of the vaccine. So the benefits continue to outweigh the risks. What about AstraZeneca? Most European countries have resumed its use. Earlier today, Mexico's president took the jab on live television. Confidence in AstraZeneca is slowly building up. But in the United States, women are reporting an unusual side effect. They're complaining of heavier and off-cycle periods after getting the jab. Is this something to be worried about? Not really. Vaccines are known to disrupt menstrual cycles, so your body will course-correct itself in time. Update number 5. The battle for oxygen continues in India. States are accusing each other of looting oxygen cylinders. It is not an ideal situation. Some hospitals have now knocked on the doors of the courts. They need oxygen. In the national capital, 3 hospitals were down to just a few hours of oxygen. And in the middle of all of this, the shortage, some states are hoarding. So the central government has stepped in. It is planning to restructure oxygen allocation to states. The fact is, India has enough capacity for this crisis. The problem is there are too many bottlenecks. For instance, you may have the oxygen, but you do not have enough cryogenic tankers to transport it. And there's a limit to what these new oxygen trains can do. What's making India's story worse is mistakes, like what happened in Nashik today. Oxygen tankers were filling up the local hospital stock, but the oxygen started leaking. We don't know why, but the end result was devastating. 22 patients died because they couldn't get oxygen. This is why India's situation is different from the world's. We must focus on both treatment and vaccination, and we must do both effectively to crush this surge. This is the biggest health crisis India has faced since independence. Other countries have seen the Spanish flu. They've seen the Asiatic flu. But India was a colony back then. The Wuhan virus is independent India's defining challenge. Let-ups and mistakes are not an option. And talking about let-ups, one organization specialized in them last year. The WHO, the World Health Organization, when the Wuhan virus was jumping borders, the WHO was focused on an entirely different issue. What should we call the virus? That was the question they were dealing with. Most of the world called it the Wuhan virus because that's where it came from. But the WHO disagreed. They said country and culture names cannot be linked to a virus. So Wuhan virus was off the table. They insisted on an anodyne name, SARS-CoV-2. That's what they called it. Anyone who linked this virus to China or to Wuhan was called racist. Cut to present day, we're living in the wave of mutants. They have been reported all over the world. What do we call them? The British mutant, the South African variant, the Brazil variant, the Indian double mutant. Do you see the pattern? All of these variants have been geotagged. Have you seen any headline talking about the B117? Do you know what it is? It's the UK variant. Same for Brazil. No one is calling it the P1. It is simply called the Brazil variant. You would imagine the World Health Organization is livid. Well, think again. Because they couldn't care less. No clarification, no condemnation. As long as you do not mention China and virus in the same sentence, the WHO will not bother you. And that's hardly surprising. This is the same body that helped China cover up the biggest health crisis of our times. They first criticized travel curbs on China, then praised Beijing's pandemic control, and then scolded world leaders for calling it the China virus. So if you think about it, this is exactly what we should have expected. Maybe if China had a variant, they would talk differently. And knowing China, chances are they already have one, but they don't want to tell the world about it. Do not expect Beijing to admit that. It won't tell you anything till the situation explodes. Unlike China, these other countries have been transparent in their response. They have reported variants, kept the world in the loop so that others can prepare themselves. You see, countries cannot determine how a virus behaves or mutates, but they can certainly be transparent. Even Brazil, where the president himself is peddling conspiracies. Bolsonaro's government has not denied the P1 variant. What about the United Kingdom? The UK variant was among the first to emerge. Some British newspapers called it the Kent variant. But there weren't cries of racism or bigotry then. British diplomats were not up at night shooting out tweets. Same here in India. The government has admitted the presence of mutations and double mutations. Some countries have banned travel to India, but there's no sign of the WHO. Last year, the travel bans were racist. This year, they're precautionary measures. And why just the WHO? Western media houses lapped up this controversy. They were more than happy to cancel leaders who called it the Wuhan virus. Let me show you a CNN headline from March 8th, Trump's malicious use of Chinese virus. The article. Now let's show you a second headline, the one on your screen. This is from the 31st of March 2021. This year, it says experts predicted the UK variant would become dominant in the US by March. This obviously is not xenophobic racism. Talk about double standards. We all remember the WHO's eagerness to defend China last year. That enthusiasm has vanished now. In January, the WHO met to decide on how to name variants. 3 months later, the issue is on the back burner because China's name does not figure anywhere. This is hypocrisy of the highest order. Let me tell you something about geotagging. It is everywhere. We have the African elephant, the great Indian bustard, the Royal Bengal tiger. These animals are also named after places. It is neither a tribute nor an abuse. It is simply a matter of convenience. Here's the bottom line. There is no evidence to suggest that names create racial tensions. The WHO played politics over naming the virus. It defended Chinese interests. And in the process, it turned a benign issue into a political lightning rod. This was their chance to set the record straight, to tell the world they would stick by their principles. But as it turns out, the WHO does not have principles. It only has orders from Beijing. Meanwhile, another border situation that could turn into a full-blown war any moment. We're talking about what's happening in Russia. It has deployed tens of thousands of troops on the border with Ukraine. The US says Russia's military buildup is bigger than 2014. That's when Russia had annexed Crimea from Ukraine. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has invited Vladimir Putin for talks. But the Russian president is in no mood for a compromise. Our next report tells you how Putin is testing the resolve of the West.
These satellite images are of the Russian military activity in Crimea. They show how Russia is stepping up its deployments near Ukraine with aircraft, vehicles at air bases, and training areas. Ukraine assesses that Russia will soon have more than 120,000 troops on the border. Short on options, the Ukrainian president sent this message from Kiev to Moscow.
Чи хоче війни Україна? Ні.
Does Ukraine want the war? No, it doesn't. But is Ukraine ready for the war? Yes, it is. Will Ukraine stop trying to achieve peace by diplomatic means? Never. But will Ukraine defend itself in case of something? Always. Our stand is simple. Ukraine never starts the war first, but we always stand till the end. Mr. Putin, I'm ready to go even further and invite you to meet anywhere in the Ukrainian Donbass where there is a war. Glory to Ukraine.
Slava Ukraine.
Zelensky is inviting Putin for talks, but it doesn't look like Moscow wants a dialogue. Tensions escalated this week when Russia carried out more military exercises in the Black Sea. Reports say the Russians are planning to block parts of these waters, a move that could impact access to Ukrainian ports. Those living near the borders are afraid. Many people have begun to leave their homes. Those who are still around fear that a war could soon break out.
I know we will have a war. We have had a truce and it will be war again. I heard that military equipment was being transported here. People are leaving little by little. I don't know what we should do. We have nowhere to go at the moment.
For the United States, Russia still remains the aggressor. Ukraine's other ally, the European Union, believes it would take just a spark to settle for confrontation. An assessment that was validated by Vladimir Putin himself. The Russian president used his annual State of the Union speech to deliver a warning to the West.
In some countries, they have started an obscene custom of blaming Russia for anything, like it was some kind of sport. I hope that no one will think of crossing the red line with Russia, and where this line will be, in every particular case, we will determine it ourselves.
The Russian military buildup has been going on for weeks now, but what's motivating Moscow's aggression still remains unclear. Either Russia is posturing by putting pressure on Kiev, or this is a serious bid to launch an offensive against Ukraine, a former state of the erstwhile Soviet Union. Either way, it is US President Joe Biden's resolve that is being tested. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Derek Chauvin is going to jail. The white police officer has been proven guilty for the murder of a black man, George Floyd. It's a watershed moment, not just for Americans, but for millions around the world, all the people who were mobilized after seeing the video of Floyd's death. As they now celebrate this historic verdict, I want them to ask themselves a question. What does the verdict really change? Does it put an end to racism? Does it eradicate the disproportionate use of force in America? The unequal policing against people of color? I say this because as the verdict was being announced, America felt the sting of another killing. A black teenage girl was shot dead by white policemen in Columbus, Ohio. And she was only 15 years old, 15. What does this tell you? That America's pandemic of racism is far from being over.
You don't shoot me, so I'm leaving. Please. Jesus. Oh my God. I can't believe this.
Unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony. Find the defendant guilty.
This is a stunning moment in history.
With the verdict today, I feel like a weight's lifted off my shoulders.
When I heard the verdict, I just screamed and I shouted and I said, "Thank you, God."
George Floyd! George Floyd! George Floyd! George Floyd!
Today, we feel a sigh of relief. Still, It cannot take away the pain.
We are the people too! If we don't get it, shut it down!
No one should be above the law, and today's verdict sends that message.
America is breathing a sigh of relief. The world can't help but discuss it.
What it means to live in a world without policing.
アメリカ・ミネソタ州で黒人男性の首を圧迫し死亡させたとして殺人などの罪に問われていた白人の元警察官について陪審団は20日3つの罪すべてで有罪の評決を出しました。
Cựu cảnh sát Mỹ Derek Chauvin, người gây ra cái chết cho người đàn ông da màu tên George Floyd, vào ngày hôm qua đã bị tòa án chính thức tuyên có tội trong cả 3 tội danh. 3 tội danh này bao gồm giết người cấp độ 2, giết người cấp độ 3.
美国前白人警察德雷克·肖万被控杀害非洲裔男子乔治·弗洛伊德案，20号在明尼苏达州明尼阿波利斯市宣判。肖万被控的谋杀和过失杀人等3项罪名全部成立。
In one of the most pivotal cases in decades.
The news is truly worthy of global coverage because it's rare for a white American cop to be convicted for the murder of a black man. But does it change anything? As Derek Chauvin was being pronounced guilty for killing George Floyd 764 miles away in Columbus, Ohio, a black teenager was shot dead by white cops. 15-year-old Ma'Khia Bryant was trying to fend off a physical assault by a group of adult women. She called the police and picked up a knife to defend herself. When the cops arrived, they shot Ma'Khia instead, assuming her to be the assailant. Watch how.
What's going on? What's going on? Hey, get down! Get down! Get down!
Another black life has been lost.
She was loving. Yeah, she had issues, but that's okay.
Another hashtag has been born. Another protest has begun. Will Ma'Khia Bryant get justice, just as George Floyd did? There is no guarantee. The figures tell you why. Since 2015, 139 police officers have been arrested for murder. Of these, only 44 have been convicted. And out of these 44, only 7 have been convicted for murder. The rest got away, with prison sentences for a few months. The rate of police shooting between 2015 and 2021 also shows a disparity based on ethnicity. Among black Americans, the figure stands at 35 police shootings per million of the population. For Hispanics, it's 26 per million of the population. And for white Americans, the figure is just 14 police shootings per million of the population. The conviction of Derek Chauvin is indeed a pivotal moment. It no doubt calls for a celebration, but it will take far more than one conviction to eradicate the virus of racism in America. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
In 1981, the Supreme Court of India asked a very important question. Who will police the police? The times have changed, but the question is still relevant. We're surrounded by self-proclaimed protectors. But who will hold them to account? How perfect are they? Turns out, not so much. We're talking about Amnesty International. It is among the leading human rights organizations in the world. This is what their website says in big, bold letters. We campaign for a world where human rights are enjoyed by all. It's an excellent thought. But for Amnesty, charity does not begin at home. They scold politicians around the world, but when it comes to their own employees, they're racist and abusive. Let me give you some background. 8 current and former Amnesty employees have blown the whistle. They have described the work culture in detail, and it does not make for good viewing. There are 4 broad issues that have been highlighted. Number 1, a culture of racist abuses. Senior staff use the N word and the P word liberally. I'm afraid the rest of it is not fit for national television. And remember, this is a human rights group. This is a human rights group that we are talking about. Some employees did manage to complain, but they were labelled as oversensitive. Number 2, systematic bias. For black employees at Amnesty, it is like swimming upstream. Their skills are constantly questioned, and that too without any justification. It is the same for ethnic minorities. They're rarely roped in for important projects and assignments. Number 3, a lack of sensitivity for minority communities. Here's an example. One employee was supposedly called the Black Girl. For the record, she had a name, she had an identity, but the white privilege washed over that. Number 4, aggressive and dismissive behavior. Employees have talked about abusive emails, especially to offices located in the global south. Now put all of these factors together and what do you get? The classic definition of a racist and toxic work culture. A mixture of white privilege and Western self-obsession. We are used to such reports in the corporate world, even in government jobs. But this is a rights organization, a self-proclaimed protector of human rights, which makes it all the more unsettling. One of the whistleblowers, Catherine Odukoya, sums it up well, and I'm quoting from what she said. We joined Amnesty hoping to campaign against human rights abuses, but were instead led down through realizing that the organization actually helped perpetuate them. So how has Amnesty responded to this report? The report was actually published in October 2020, but Amnesty held off on the press release until now. The final version includes this statement from them, and I'm quoting again. It is a timely reminder that discrimination, racism, and anti-black racism exist in our organization. It has highlighted both the extent and systematic nature of racism and indicates that we must address white privilege wherever it exists. Think about it. How would Amnesty react to such a statement? Imagine the statement coming from a third world country. Would Amnesty be satisfied with their explanation? Unlikely. Amnesty is an overwhelmingly white organization. It has fewer offices in the global south. It has fewer members from minority and non-white communities. But we tend to overlook these drawbacks because the world is seduced by Amnesty's fight for justice. And we are not denying their work. But with such a big, shiny glass house, we must question their moral ground. Now to the biggest story from Africa. The president of Chad has died. The news has come a day after he was declared the winner of the presidential election. The country's army says he was killed on the battlefield fighting rebel forces. The president's son has been named the interim leader, but rebel groups have rejected this appointment. And as I speak, they're headed towards Chad's capital to take control, they say. An exodus has begun. Thousands are fleeing for safety. America and France, 2 countries that are currently involved in anti-terror operations in Chad, are bracing for an onslaught.
The president of Chad is no more. Idriss Déby died from wounds sustained in battle against rebels in the north. The 68-year-old career military man had ruled Chad with an iron fist since 1990. He was a key ally of the West in its anti-jihadist campaign in Western Africa. His death has now opened a period of uncertainty for the country. Insurgents are threatening to take over the capital. The oil-rich Central African nation could soon witness a violent battle for control.
Mesdames et messieurs les diplomates, la guerre pour laquelle le maréchal a perdu sa vie.
Ladies and gentlemen, diplomats, the war for which the Marshal has lost his life is not over. The security situation remains highly serious given the persistence and magnitude of the terrorist threat.
Chad's Transitional Military Council has named the deceased president's son, 37-year-old Mahamat Idris Deby, as the country's interim leader. The military promises to hand over power to a civilian government by holding free and fair elections within 18 months.
Les forces de défense et de sécurité ne cherchent nullement.
The defense and security forces are not seeking to seize power. We would like to reassure that the members of the Transitional Military Council will hand over power to a civilian government after free and democratic elections within 18 months.
But the Front for Change and Concord, the leading rebel group in Chad, has rejected the military transition, vowing to march on the country's capital. In a statement, the rebels have stated, Chad is not a monarchy. There can be no dynastic revolution of power in the country. The rebels are yet to reach the capital, in N'Djamena. But people are worried about the prospect of fighting. They are fleeing the capital by the thousands.
May he rest in peace. We've known only him as country's leader. He's worked hard for the prosperity and security of the people. No one complained about their social status during their reign. Today is a difficult time for us. May he should rest in peace.
What we are waiting for is, how do we call it, the moment of transition. We don't want another military representative in power during this transition because there will be problems again. A civilian is needed.
Internationally, Chad's Western allies are alarmed. They are hoping their counter-terrorism efforts are not pushed off course.
Aujourd'hui, une transition commence dans des conditions dont nous prenons acte.
Today, a transition is starting in conditions that we are monitoring. We hope that this will take place peacefully, in a spirit of dialogue and consultations to attain a civil governance that is stable and for the military transition to be as short as possible.
In terms of what this means for the American embassy there, effective April 17th, the U.S. Embassy in Chad remains on ordered departure status. We continually adjust our posture at embassies and consulates, missions around the world in line with local security concerns and the health situation on the ground.
So far, the situation is largely under control. Chad's military says it has halted the advance of rebel forces. But there's a great deal of uncertainty around how events will unfold in the days to come. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you as always with Gravitas images. Thanks for watching. Stay safe.